Okay, so if I missed you coming in, say something. But I didn't see Hope yet. All right. No Miranda yet? No, Miranda is here. So you got to say something. I don't know how I missed you. Bad. All right, we got you present now. Angel Cardenas. Maritza. Alexa. Lucas yet? Jaden yet? Hannah yet? Perfect. They come, we'll get them set. Okay, so no Hope. No Angel yet. No Maritza yet. Alexa yet. No Lucas yet. No Jaden yet. No Hannah yet. All right, perfect. Good Thursday to you here as we get to the end. I want to go over real quick what you have to have done by tomorrow. So remember, the deadline to turn anything in for this quarter is going to be tomorrow, 3:15. And you'll want to work on that and get that in. Sunday evening or Monday morning, I will send you a grade sheet of everything from the semester. It'll have all of your grades except for obviously the final exam. Then Monday, I'll talk to you about the final exam, tell you what you need to do, prepare for that, and then get ready. So last week, we finished up sort of the fighting in World War I, and we'll review that. So Module 15 focused on trench warfare, the advancements that you had in warfare during that time period, and then U.S. involvement in the war sort of pushes the tide over and the war comes to an end. So you had two sets of review questions, fighting the Great War, and then the tide turning. Those are still open on TCI if you want to do that. As I said, this week we'll take a look at post-Europe, all right, or post-World War I Europe in terms of what it looks like and why the changes that happen after the end of the war lead to another world war in 1939, so 21 years later. So we'll go over that, tell you what you need to have done by tomorrow at 3:15. So let me recap for you quickly here. Okay. This is going to recap World War I and bring us up to what we need to discuss in terms of what Europe looks like post World War I.
In 1914, the tensions generated by international rivalries exploded into general war. The spark that led to the explosion occurred in the Bosnian town of Sarajevo, where a Serb terrorist assassinated Austrian Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and an intricate chain of alliances began to draw the great powers into the war. Two sides formed, the Allies and the Central Powers. Russia was first to mobilize its army, coming to the aid of Serbia and provoking a German declaration of war. Bound by a treaty with Russia, France mobilized too, and when Germany violated the neutrality of Belgium, Britain declared war. Other European powers were soon drawn into the conflict, and eventually it turned into a global war, with the United States joining the Allies in 1917. Combat began on August 4th, when a German task force crossed the Belgian border and soon overran the country. 8 days later, Austria invaded Serbia. Russia attacked Germany, advancing into East Prussia and also striking at Galicia in Austria-Hungary. After achieving a major breakthrough in France, the German offensive began to stall just 15 miles from Paris. On the Eastern Front, the Germans met the Russians at Tannenberg and inflicted on them a crushing defeat. On the Western Front, the Allies counterattacked at the Marne, driving the Germans back. And at Ypres, they fought off a German drive to capture the vital Channel ports, with both sides racing to the sea in an effort to outflank the other. By Christmas 1914, the Western Front was stabilized, and a solid line stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. On the Eastern Front, the Russians withdrew from East Prussia when the Germans attacked Poland. In the Caucasus region, the Turks seized Russian and Persian territory, but were driven back in January 1950. On the Eastern Front, Germany and Austria prepared for a new offensive. Launched in May, it advanced the front line 300 miles and resulted in 2 million Russian casualties. New Allied offensives in France achieved little, and at Ypres, the Germans initiated the use of poison gas with horrifying consequences. Italy entered the war in May, but in a series of fruitless drives at Austria, lost 280,000 men in 6 months. In an attempt to knock Turkey out of the war, the Allies launched an invasion at Gallipoli, but badly organized, it was abandoned in 1916. In the Balkans, armies from Austria, Germany, and Bulgaria finally overwhelmed all Serbian resistance. The Germans renewed their western offensive in 1916, attacking Verdun with the deliberate intention of bleeding white the French army. The defense of Verdun left over 500,000 French casualties. The Allies began their own counteroffensive at the Somme, where the British used tanks for the first time, but the attacks achieved little more than horrendous casualties. In the east, the Russians began the Brusilov offensive across a 300-mile-wide front. It was finally checked when German reinforcements were rushed in from Verdun. Encouraged by early Russian successes, Romania joined in the offensive, but the country was eventually occupied by Austro-German forces. One major naval engagement of the war, the Battle of Jutland, fought in May 1916 between the main British and German fleets, ended indecisively. Elsewhere, Allied forces captured some Albanian territory, but lost ground in Greece while Russia advanced in Turkey. The British also advanced in Mesopotamia, and Colonel T.E. Lawrence, soon to gain worldwide fame as Lawrence of Arabia, helped organize an Arab revolt against the Turkish Empire. Anticipating a new Allied offensive in the spring of 1917, the Germans withdrew to the Hindenburg Line. In the attacks that followed, French casualties were so heavy that soldiers resorted to mutiny. Before the Germans could take advantage of the French setbacks, the British began a new offensive. They suffered 240,000 casualties at the Third Battle of Ypres. The Italians renewed their attacks at Isonzo, achieving some success at first, but German troops were rushed to the front, and driven back in catastrophic retreat, Italy lost 275,000 men as prisoners. The Allies suffered a worse setback when revolution toppled the Tsar. As the Russian army disintegrated, the Germans recaptured lost ground, and in December, the Bolshevik government signed a truce with Germany, effectively ending Russian participation in the war. In the Middle East, the British took Baghdad, and breaking through Turkish defenses in Palestine, entered Jerusalem. By 1918, fresh American troops began to reach the Western Front in increasing numbers. The Germans planned a final assault before American manpower could influence the outcome. Shifting forces from the Russian front, they began a series of thrusts at the Allied lines and eventually reached the Marne again. Newly arrived American troops stanched one German offensive and in the counterattack seized Belleau Wood. The Germans renewed their efforts, but with American troops arriving at a rate of 300,000 a month, Allied counterattacks repulsed them. Having suffered 500,000 casualties in 5 months, the German army was spent, and the Allies took the initiative. The Americans attacked at Saint-Mihiel and also spearheaded the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Although the Central Powers occupied huge areas of Russia, their war effort was collapsing. The Allies advanced in Italy, in the Balkans, and in the Middle East, and continued their offensive on the Western Front. With its forces in retreat, Germany asked for an armistice. On November 11, 1918, the fighting stopped. The Paris Peace Conference of 1919 imposed stiff reparations on the Central Powers, redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East, and sowed the seeds for a Second World conflict that would erupt 20 years later.
So you can see there in terms of the total cost, right? 6.6 million Russians, almost 3 million Brits, 5.6 million French, 6 million Germans, 4.5 million Austrians or Hungarians. It was by far the deadliest conflict that there had ever been. One of the things that's interesting is as the turn of century happened, you have a number of very interesting developments in terms of what happens. This here is an audio recording taken at the front of what it sounds like basically leading up to the armistice. So that is why Veterans Day is always November 11th, because on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour, the Great War, which we'll call World War I after World War II starts in 1939, comes to an end. So this here, let me share again with you so you can see it. This is taken at the front, and this is what it sounds like. It is almost eerie how everything stops at the same time. It's crazy. You start hearing birds chirp and everything else in terms of what happens, but that is the front in Europe on the Western Front. And when the war is over, that is what it sounds like. So now that the war is over, what is Europe like after the Great War, or what we'll call World War I, after it's over? So a couple of things to look at, and I can show you this in a map. So the first thing that you have is obviously a change in the countries. So this here is a map pre-World War I Europe, and you can see as this was one of the maps that we did. Let's try to get this up here. This is what Europe looks like, right? And we've looked at this before, but we know, right, that this here is Great Britain. This here is France, right? You've got your normal suspects here, Spain. This here is Germany. So look at how big Germany is. This here is Austria-Hungary. Just abbreviate that. This up here is Russia. Russia signs an agreement with the Germans because of their, somebody says you guys can't see the map. Let me bring it up. No, hopefully you can see the map now. Anyway, you can see that very few countries here, right? Very few countries in terms of what we have. Thanks, I'm glad you can see it now, right? So if I go here, and I'll just do this quick. So we know that this is Great Britain, this is France, this is Spain, this is Italy, this is Switzerland, this is all of Germany. You can see how big it is going east to west. This is Austria-Hungary. You had Bosnia, Serbia, Albania down here, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Ottoman Empire, and then Russia. So this is what it looked like before World War I, right? And down here is the area of Sarajevo where the assassination happens, right? When that happens, Austria-Hungary declares war there. The Germans declare war on the oops, went the wrong way. Hold on just a second. Let me erase that. The Russians declare war next, right, on Austria-Hungary, right? Then you have France and Germany. Germany goes into Belgium. Great Britain gets involved. We talked about all of that a couple of modules ago. So once you have ended World War I, after everything is settled, this is what Europe will look like now. You're going to go from those few countries to this. And so you go to 32 countries, basically. They take an immense amount of land from Germany. So you can see that Poland is created. You have these Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, Belarus, created. Ottoman Empire becomes Turkey. You have Romania, Bulgaria. They create a new country called Yugoslavia, which they take from Austria-Hungary. This is what's left of Austria. This is what's left of Hungary. And then from the Germans, they create a new country called Czechoslovakia. And here you have the small country of Luxembourg that's created. They create countries basically out of nowhere. And what the French and the British wanted to do was create a buffer between themselves and the Germans. They also, if you notice, gave the Polish a Baltic Sea for their navy to try to hope and keep Germany surrounded. So that is what the map of post-Europe looks like. Any questions so far? Okay, so what we have post-World War I Europe is a situation in which there are a number of deaths, okay, a number of deaths that had never been seen in warfare before. And so Britain and France in particular, who had fought the war from the beginning, from 1914, remember the United States doesn't come along until much later in the war. Even though they turned the tide, the French and the British had suffered nearly 8.5 million deaths, way more than the United States would. And so when these countries got together, the armistice and the fighting stopped in November of 1918 on the 11th. They agreed to meet in Paris for a peace conference. In secret, the French and the British had made an arrangement basically to blame the Germans for everything. And so this peace conference involved over 30 countries. They were going to talk about our president, Woodrow Wilson's idea of a League of Nations, which is the precursor to what we have now with the United Nations. Defeated countries were included in the peace conference, but they were outnumbered by these other allied countries. Basically, at the peace conference, they agreed to award German and Ottoman overseas possessions, right? Imperialism is what sort of in the decades led us up to this nationalism and this drive for more and more land. They basically, the French and the British take the German overseas assets in Africa, in Asia. Same thing with the Ottoman overseas empire in parts of Africa and Asia, and they give them to France and Britain. They draw new boundaries, as I showed you there, and that creates even more nationalism, right? Because you have a country called Czechoslovakia that you never had before. You have a country called Yugoslavia that you never had before. So Serbia, Bosnia, these places that we had had before are now absorbed into other areas. Now, our president, Woodrow Wilson, is the reason that we stayed out of World War I for so long. He saw sort of what happened in terms of these secret agreements, these peace treaties that were not known to everybody. It wasn't known when Russia came to the aid of Serbia that Austria-Hungary had these arrangements as well. And that's what gathered all of these forces to create this world conflict. So he introduces in January of 1919 a plan called 14 points. dealing with diplomatic issues, territorial issues, and this setting up of a League of Nations, and basically trying to stem and fix the problems that caused World War I instead of continuing on with that. He is going to be basically ignored because the French and the British had already worked behind the scenes in December and early January to arrange the sort of spoils of war, right? You win the war, you get to dictate the terms. In June of 1919, they met and signed the Treaty of Versailles, confirming the territorial changes that I showed you on that map, right? So if we look at that map, it confirmed these changes to these new countries. It gave specific mandates on German and Ottoman possessions. It restricted Germany from rebuilding its military, its navy. It made the Germans basically pay for the entirety of the war. And it put in there 5, 10, and 15-year sort of goals if the Germans kept paying off the cost of the war, if the Germans kept under a certain military portion. They were going to be given land back in what's called the Rhineland. So the Rhineland is basically, and this is what the French wanted their buffer for, but basically the Rhineland is a bunch of land here between Germany and France. And in the treaty, what happened is even though it's German territory, the French were allowed to keep troops there. And in the treaty, it said, hey, if you're doing what you're supposed to, we'll pull back this many miles to the west after 5 years, this many miles to the west after 10 years, this many miles to the west, and finally leave Germany after 15 years. But you've got to be on your best behavior for 15 years. So you can see these arguments and disagreements going all the way back, right, to even the time of Napoleon, right? Centuries of being upset, you can sort of see in terms of what goes on. So that's what you have at this time. And it's not going to work out very well, as we're going to have another world war in 21 years, because September 1st, 1939, Hitler's going to invade Poland and start another war. So this Treaty of Versailles, as I said, is very, very harsh on the Germans. And this just sort of gives you a rundown. I basically sort of highlighted what that is. But basically, they're going to blame Germany for everything, and they're going to make Germany pay for everything. Germany becomes so in debt that a loaf of bread ends up costing about $300 German dollars. And it is going to be a terrible burden on the Germans. The Kaiser and then the Weimar Republic that takes over for the Kaiser, they're not going to be able to survive. And that's how you sort of have a split government in which Hitler's going to be able to rise up. Hitler and his Nazi party is going to be able to take control. Some points in the Treaty of Versailles, the Covenant Clause. Members of the League, right, undertake and respect and preserve as against all external aggression of territorial aggression, right? They're trying to address things that have happened. In any case of any such aggression, or in case of any threat or danger, aggression, the council shall advise by means which this obligation shall be filled, right? So basically, if there's anything, we're going to join up against you and take you. The Mandates Clause, to those colonies and territories which, as a consequence of the late war, have ceased to be under the sovereignty of the states which formerly governed them and which are inhabited by peoples not yet able to stand for themselves, they're basically setting up how they are going to be set up as a country. So it's basically saying we're going to create a country for you, whether you like it or not. This is the war guilt clause. In this, they basically blame Germany for everything that goes on. And you can see that the Allied and associated governments affirm Germany accepts the responsibility, all right, of Germany and the Allies for causing the loss of damage to which the Allied and associated governments and their nationals have been subjected. That means, right, it was Germany who was the one that was the aggressor. right? Even though Austria-Hungary is the one that attacked Serbia. So you can see there where they blame the Germans for everything. The reparations clause here says, recognize the resources of Germany are not adequate after taking account permanent diminutions of such response will result from other provisions of this treaty. However, we're going to require Germany undertakes, right, will make compensation for all damage done to the civilian population of the Allied and those Allied countries attacked by Germany. So it doesn't matter if it was by land, by sea, by air, general all damage, right, is going to be paid for by Germany. They basically take an entire world war and make the Germans absolutely responsible for what had happened. Any questions on that? Okay, so let me reset this so you can see sort of Wilson's idea. So our President Woodrow Wilson had tried to stay out of this war. It doesn't work for the entirety, right? As we're drawn into the war, we talked about the Zimmerman note, the sinking of the Lusitania. The Americans have more in common with the French and the British than they do the Germans and the cartoons that come out. But basically, April of 1917 through the end of 17, all the way through November of 18, the United States fights in this war for about a year and 7 months. As it becomes apparent that the Allies are going to win, Wilson tries to come up with an idea about a League of Nations, where we can bring countries together and talk about disputes in terms of imperialist ambitions, territorial, national interest, people wanting. And so this is sort of what he proposes. You can see that he talks about open covenants, right? We got to make these agreements of peace in open so that everybody knows. He talks about the free navigation of the seas, right? So that we don't have the Germans sinking cruise liners anymore. People worried about that. He just goes point by point about things that have come up that have caused these sort of conflicts, right? Removing all economic barriers, allowing free trade. This is the spheres of influence in China. Adequate guarantees given and taken with national armaments will be reduced to the lowest point of domestic safety. We don't need to keep spending all of this money on tanks and guns. Let's just get down to a level where everybody's safe. So basically everybody can spend money on rebuilding their country after this war. A free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of all colonial claims, right? Basically going back to the beginning, everybody giving up their colonies, and let's talk about what is fair for everybody. And then because of the Russian Revolution, we'll talk about this in the start of the spring semester, but basically Germany and the other Central Powers on the other side of World War I had gone into Russian territory when they were fighting their own civil war and ousting their czar. And basically, he's saying, you've got to give that land up. You took it, you don't own it. So you can see a number of different things that Wilson tries to circumvent, and it would have been successful, right? But France and Britain were like, we're not interested. They had made agreements with everybody before. And then finally, his 14th point, a general association of nations must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose, guarantees of political independence, right? That's for these nationalities, and territorial integrity, right? We can't have France staying in Germany for 15 years because they're nervous about what they're going to do. Obviously, his 14 points are not going to be well received by the French or the British or even most of the other allies. So you're going to see a Second World War take place. That summary of the video recapping World War I is on that page there. This sort of shows you the aftermath. So let me reset this and show you. This is crazy here in terms of the amount of dead, what it does in terms of money, and what it's going to lead to.
After 15 months, U.S. Attorney John Durham has filed the first criminal charge in his investigation.
After 4 years of fighting in World War I, millions had lost their lives and the world was forever changed. Hi, I'm Rebecca Braden and welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be taking a look at the aftermath of the First World War. Undeniably, the greatest consequence of the First World War was the massive loss of life. France had lost nearly 1.4 million soldiers and an additional 300,000 civilians in the war. More than 1.8 million
I don't think you're sharing it.
were killed, as well as 1.5 million civilians.
It didn't click on it?
No, I don't think you're sharing your
Yeah.
screen.
Thanks. I'll tell you, this computer is just crazy. Okay, so let me try this. I'll go back.
After 4 years of fighting in World War I, millions had lost their lives and the world was forever changed. Hi, I'm Rebecca Braden and welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be taking a look at the aftermath of the First World War. Undeniably, the greatest consequence of the First World War was the massive loss of life. France had lost nearly 1.4 million soldiers and an additional 300,000 civilians in the war. More than 1.8 million Russian soldiers were killed, as well as 1.5 million civilians. In total, World War I was responsible for the deaths of over 16 million people. However, numbers relating to the death toll are still debated. Considered separate but still related to World War I was the effect the flu pandemic of 1918 had on the world. First seen in North America, it is suspected the flu was brought to Europe by the American forces. This flu was ultimately responsible for the deaths of nearly 50 million people worldwide. Many countries on both sides felt the severe economic consequences of waging a world war. The United Kingdom went from one of the world's largest overseas investors to one of its biggest debtors. Less concrete changes for Britain were also apparent. There was a surge in national pride among some of the Commonwealth nations. Countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand held important roles in numerous battles throughout the war. Subsequently, they received more diplomatic autonomy in the decade that followed. Returning home from the battlefields, soldiers across the world were greeted with a shifting social landscape. Women had filled the gap in jobs left by the men serving in the war. Motivated to help their country, many women worked distributing coal or making ammunition, and also provided a large amount of voluntary work. These new roles helped to change the social status and working lives of women, even after World War I had ended. Political lines were redrawn in the aftermath of the war. Once powerful German, Russian, Ottoman, and Austro-Hungarian empires were dissolved, with the latter two ceasing to exist altogether. Large parts of the former empires were now split up into new countries like Finland, Turkey, and Czechoslovakia. Most importantly for the future of Europe and the world was what was happening in Germany. A parliamentary system called the Weimar Republic replaced the imperial form of government in 1919. However, the new government was riddled with issues. They were forced to deal with hyperinflation, hostility from other countries, and political extremists within their own country. Many in Germany were still resentful over the Treaty of Versailles, which had forced the country to accept sole responsibility in causing the First World War. Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party used these strong emotions to their advantage, and Hitler climbed to the position of Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Very quickly, Hitler established a totalitarian regime called the Third Reich and put an end to the Weimar Republic after only 14 years. Only 20 years after the end of World War I, Nazi Germany invaded Poland and the century's Second World War was underway.
Right, so that's what you have in terms of things, Treaty of Versailles, the ignoring of the 14 points, blaming Germany for everything. That is going to lead up to the start of World War II, September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. And so we'll get into that as we move on. There is this map of post-World War I Europe that you'll do on Go Formative. So you just click that there, and it'll be a formative. You see what happens with those countries there. There are 7 review questions on Wilson's 14 points. right? What secret agreements did Britain and France make before the Versailles Conference? It's all in this document here, and we had gone over it. And then the last thing that you'll do for this unit and the semester is the 25 questions over post-World War I Europe. So this review game, these questions will go in the exact order, I believe, of the unit test. So you can practice this as many times as you want, and then when you're ready, you can take the test. And the test, as I said, I think is in the same order as the review game. So you can even have both of them up at the same time if you wanted, if you were smart, and go over those items and then fill these answers in, right? But we already know pretty much all of this, right? So when you look at this, which of the following was the main legacy of World War I on Western society? We know it didn't provide a lasting peace, which is choice D, because we have World War II just 21 years later. We know that Germany was doing horribly economically, so it can't be B. And then the Enlightenment belief that reason would prevail, reason didn't prevail, right? So we know that it's C, a sense of disillusionment with pre-war institutions, because they basically don't change anything that led